Greetings, loyal subjects at Lumen Scholar Institute. This is week 21, and it's your Tuesday video. We're going to be talking about the Queen of England, good Queen Bess, today as we continue our history studies. She is a fascinating character, and so I'm dressed up as royalty today. You may bow to me, okay? And if you don't, off with your heads. No, I love Queen Elizabeth. So let's learn a little bit more about her. We've talked about Henry VIII, the English king who had 6 wives. He kept getting married because he wanted a son. And then when his 3rd wife, Jane Seymour, finally gave birth to a baby boy, he hoped for another one. Back in the early days of the Renaissance, people often died of illnesses that wouldn't really be very serious today. So Henry VIII wanted another son in case anything happened to his oldest boy, little Prince Edward. But Henry VIII never had another son, and when he died, Prince Edward became King Edward VI of England. Edward was only 9 years old at the time, so his uncles helped rule England for him. But Edward wasn't in very good health, and he kept coughing. He was very thin. As Edward got older, he became even weaker. By the time he was 16, he was forced to stay in bed. Physicians tried every cure they knew. One cure was to put leeches on the young king to suck out his blood. Another was to have him swallow a live spider covered in molasses. None of these cures worked, so everyone knew that the king was dying. But who would rule England next? Edward had no brothers, only 2 sisters. Mary, the oldest sister, was the daughter of Henry VIII and his first wife, Catherine. Elizabeth, the younger sister, was the daughter of Anne Boleyn, who had been beheaded. Even though England had never had a woman on the throne before, one of these 2 sisters would have to become queen. Their followers argued over who should have the throne, and Mary's powerful supporters won the argument. So in 1553, Mary was declared the first Queen of England. She rode through the streets of London to the Tower of London to be crowned. And her little sister Elizabeth knelt down and promised to be faithful to the new queen. Elizabeth was very careful to say only kind things about her sister. In public, Elizabeth acted humble and loving to Mary. But in truth, Elizabeth was frightened. She and Mary had never been good friends. Mary had been declared Princess of Wales, heir to the English throne when she was born. Until she was a teenager, Mary had been treated like a queen in waiting. She had her own coat of arms, her own private apartments, and 160 servants to wait on her. She traveled in a velvet litter carried by servants and ate her meals beneath a special canopy that showed how important she was. Everywhere she went, people bowed to her and called her princess. But then her father, Henry VIII, married Anne Boleyn, and Elizabeth was born. The minute that Elizabeth drew her first breath, a herald announced to all the people that Elizabeth, not Mary, was now Princess of Wales and heir to the throne. And Henry VIII ordered Mary's coat of arms to be stripped from all her clothes and given to Elizabeth. He sent all of her servants away and told Mary that she had to be her little sister's maid of honor. Now the baby Elizabeth was carried around on the velvet litter. Mary had to ride or walk behind her. Elizabeth was given the household of servants, the special place to eat, and beautiful clothes made out of satin and silk. Mary had to eat down at the foot of the table and live in an uncomfortable room in the palace. So how do you think Mary felt about Elizabeth then? It would be hard to love your little sister if your parents took everything that belonged to you and gave it to her, and then told you that you had to be her servant. Mary refused to admit that Elizabeth was now the princess. "That's a title that belongs only to me," she demanded. But he ordered her to accept her new place. Elizabeth was the Princess of Wales, and Mary was just a lady in waiting. Of course, the exact same thing happened to Elizabeth only a few years later. When Elizabeth was 4 years old, little Prince Edward was born. Immediately, the herald announced that Edward, not Elizabeth, was now the heir to the throne. Henry took away Elizabeth's coat of arms, her servants, her velvet litter, her special place to eat. She was sent to live in a house away from the castle. Her governess wrote a letter to the palace complaining that the little girl hadn't been given even enough money to live on. She doesn't have a decent nightgown or handkerchiefs, the governess objected. Oh no, handkerchief. Now that Elizabeth and Mary had both lost their positions, Mary was kinder to her little sister. But she never forgot how Elizabeth had taken her place. And when she became queen, she passed a law saying that Elizabeth had never really been the Princess of Wales. Then she accused Elizabeth of plotting against her. She ordered her sister imprisoned in the Tower of London. When soldiers came to arrest Elizabeth and take her away, Elizabeth was afraid that she would be killed. She cried out, "Give me a minute to write my sister a letter." Then she scrawled on a piece of paper, "I never talked or thought about any such thing as taking your throne away. May I die a shameful death if I did such a thing. Do not condemn me." But Mary refused to read her letter. Elizabeth spent months in the Tower of London, expecting any morning that the soldiers would drag her away and behead her. Mary couldn't find any evidence that Elizabeth had plotted against her, though. So finally, Mary let her sister go to live in a small, dingy house in the country. Here, Elizabeth was surrounded by servants chosen by Mary and by soldiers who searched her house constantly for any signs of treason. She wasn't even allowed to go for a walk without special permission from Mary. 4 years after Elizabeth's arrest, she was sitting under a tree reading the Bible in Greek. A soldier nearby watched every move. She heard galloping horses and lifted her head to watch the road. Here they come. A messenger came into sight wearing the royal colors. Was he coming to tell her jailers that Mary had finally condemned her to death? Elizabeth stood up and watched the man dismount from his horse. But instead of speaking to the soldier behind her, the messenger fell on his knees in front of Elizabeth. "Mary, Queen of England, is dead," he said. "You are now Queen of England. God save the Queen." So Elizabeth was now the Queen of England. When the people of England heard that Mary was dead, they sang and danced in the streets. Mary had not been popular. As queen, Mary wanted to bring England back to the Catholic faith that her father Henry had rejected. So she had sent men throughout England demanding that her people swear allegiance to the Catholic Church. 300 men and women who refused to do that were burned at the stake. Mary's subjects had begun to call her Bloody Mary because of her cruelty. So when Elizabeth rode into London with 1,000 men behind her, the streets were lined with cheering people. Elizabeth arrived at the castle and took charge of it. She replaced all of Mary's servants and ladies-in-waiting with her own and fired most of Mary's advisors. And she planned a great ceremony in which she would be crowned king. When the day came, Elizabeth was carried to Westminster Abbey, London's most important church. On a litter covered with gold cloth, her gown was also made of gold cloth. Over it she wore a velvet cape lined with ermine fur on its edges. She had on a heavy necklace, of rubies and pearls. What did I do with my necklace of rubies and pearls? A heavy gold crown was placed on her head. A minister put holy oil on her forehead, and she was given a scepter, a globe with a cross on it, and a special ring to show her power. Elizabeth was now Elizabeth I, Queen of England, and the year was 1558. Elizabeth would remain on the throne of England for 45 years. Those years would become known as the Elizabethan Age. Under Elizabeth, England would become peaceful, rich, and more powerful than ever before. Elizabeth didn't want to make the same mistake that Mary had made. She wanted her people to love her, not hate her. So although she announced that England would now be a Protestant country again, she did not force her people to swear that they were Protestants. No more Catholic church services were allowed. Elizabeth wanted her advisors to be Protestants, but she didn't ask her subjects what they did in private. She told her advisors that she didn't intend to make windows into men's souls, and they could believe how they chose. This was an unusual attitude for a Renaissance ruler to take. Many other European rulers were busy making sure that all of their subjects swore allegiance to either the Catholic or Protestant faiths. But Elizabeth was more worried about whether or not her subjects were loyal to her, not one church or the other. Elizabeth was also determined never to get married. stay away, guys. Mary had married a Spanish prince who convinced her to send English soldiers to help with Spanish battles. The English didn't like the prince, whose name was Philip. They thought he was arrogant and selfish, and he was a foreigner. They didn't want English soldiers to go fight in foreign wars. And when Philip started to help Mary make laws for England, many of Mary's people ran through the streets shouting, "We will have no foreigner for our king." All of Elizabeth's advisors expected her to get married as soon as possible. As a matter of fact, when Elizabeth called her first Parliament told her, "We can't talk about laws until we've arranged a wedding for you." But Elizabeth knew that if she got married, her husband would be the real king of England. Back in those days, most people thought that men were smarter, wiser, and stronger than women. If Elizabeth married a prince, more and more of her power would go to him. Elizabeth had no intention of giving up any of her powers. Parliament insisted. They didn't think that a woman could do a good job of ruling England. Mary certainly hadn't. Elizabeth needed a man to help her, and she needed to have children. What if she died without an heir? Who would be the king after her? Philip, Mary's husband, offered to take on the job of marrying Elizabeth. He had enjoyed the power that came with the throne of England, and he wanted it back. Of course, he didn't say, "I want to marry Elizabeth so I can be the king of England again." He put it in very fancy words. "I have decided to render this service to God and offered to marry the Queen of England. It would be better for herself and for her kingdom if she would take a husband who might relieve her of those labors which are only fit for men." But Elizabeth put her foot down. She took off the ring she had been given when she was crowned, and she held it up in front of those men. "Behold," she said, "the pledge of this my wedlock and marriage was with my kingdom. Every one of you, and as many as are Englishmen, are children and kinsmen to me." Elizabeth's words meant that she had already married England. She had no room for a husband because the job of being queen would take up all of her time. And Elizabeth did put all of her time into ruling England. She worked hard, making alliances with other countries, sending explorers out to claim undiscovered lands for England, and defending her land for invasion. 30 years after she became queen, Elizabeth encouraged her soldiers before a battle that we're going to learn about in just a minute by shouting, "I am resolved in the midst and heat of the battle to live and die among you all, to lay down for my God and for my kingdom and my people my honor and my blood, even in the dust. I know I have the body of a weak and feeble king, of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king, and a king of England too." Elizabeth was right. She was the best ruler England ever had. Her people loved her and gave her the nickname of Good Queen Bess. Well, I want to tell you about one of these invasions that she had to fight off. The invasion that caused that famous speech that she gave. Okay, so let's jump ahead just a little bit. Okay. Spain had a problem. English adventurers kept getting in its way of exploration and travel through the globe. Philip, the King of Spain, you remember him, when he was still just a prince. Oh, okay, let's see, we already talked about that. Okay. English explorers were trying to settle land in North America that Philip wanted for himself. And he became more and more annoyed by English ships that insisted on sailing into Spanish waters. English traders were making money by selling slaves in the West Indies, and sometimes English ships stopped Spanish ships, loaded with gold, and robbed them. Finally, Philip sent Elizabeth a message: "Keep your English ships out of Spanish waters, or Spain will declare war on England." Elizabeth didn't want to risk a war with Spain. She wasn't sure that England was strong enough to defeat the Spanish. So she sent Philip a peaceful, humble message in return. She promised that the English would leave Spanish territory in the New World and that they would leave Spanish ships alone. Secretly, Elizabeth gave her sailors permission to go on robbing the Spanish. English pirates knew that they could steal Spanish treasure and sink Spanish ships with no fear of punishment from the Queen. And meanwhile, Elizabeth kept right on sending English ships on journeys of exploration. England grew richer and richer and stronger and stronger. And Philip soon realized that Elizabeth's promise had been a big lie. He decided that it was time to prove once and for all that Spain, not England, was the most powerful country in the world. So Philip began to build the biggest fleet of warships ever. Shipbuilders labored over huge galleys. Those were warships rowed by oarsmen down in the ship's belly. And galleons. Those were enormous sailing ships filled with men and supplies. Philip planned to crush the English navy with these huge ships. Then they could unload their soldiers on England's shore. The ships were... Smaller ships were built as well, and Philip planned to send these ships inland down English rivers. Once England was filled with Spanish soldiers, Philip could force England to stay out of the New World. And Philip had another reason for invading England. Philip was a Catholic king, and he knew that Catholics were not allowed to worship openly in England. Once he had conquered England, he planned to make England Catholic again. He thought that his conquest of England would be a great service to God. So Philip assembled over 130 ships into a great army called the Spanish Armada. This floating army, the Armada, was ready to sail for England, and the Spanish commanders were given strict orders. They were to act in a Christian manner at all times. Catholic priests would accompany every ship and would hold church services on board. The soldiers were not allowed to swear. Philip wanted his armada to be a holy army, taking England back for the Catholic Church. Meanwhile, the people of England were frantically preparing for the Spanish invasion. Queen Elizabeth put her cousin, Lord Howard, in charge of the English navy, but she made her most experienced sailor, Sir Francis Drake, second in command. At first, Howard and Drake decided that the English ship should sail south and attack the Spanish Armada before it could even leave the Spanish port. But strong winds blew the English navy back to the north, and so the ships anchored at Plymouth on the south coast of England, waiting for the Spanish Armada to arrive. Philip's huge fleet sailed slowly north. Finally, a small English ship keeping watch in the channel glimpsed the masts of the Spanish ships on the horizon. Its captain sped back to the harbor, leaped from his ship, and ran to find the commanders. Sir Howard and Sir Francis Drake were having a friendly game of lawn bowling on a smooth grassy field near the harbor. Drake was just getting ready to toss his own ball down the grass when the captain arrived. "Sir Francis!" the captain gasped. "Come at once! The Spanish ships are in sight!" Sir Francis Drake aimed his ball down the smooth grass. "Don't worry," he said. "There is plenty of time to finish the game and beat the Spaniards too." But Drake and Howard didn't spend much time finishing their game. They ordered the English ships to sail into the English Channel and wait for the Spanish Armada there. When the Spanish ships arrived, they found the English navy ready to fight, and the battle for England was about to begin. The Spanish ships were huge and filled with soldiers because the Spanish planned on winning by a technique called grappling and boarding. A Spanish ship would sail up beside an English ship, throw hooks onto its deck, pull the two ships tightly together. Then Spanish soldiers would pour over onto the English ship and take it over. But the English had a different strategy in mind. Their ships were small and quick, with guns along each side. Rather than boarding the Spanish ships, the English tried to shoot them full of holes so that they could no longer fight. In addition, they lit fire to several English ships and sailed them into the Spanish Armada, lighting several Spanish ships on fire. The English strategy worked. Even though the Spanish Navy was twice as large, the English won. 70 Spanish ships were destroyed. 20,000 Spanish soldiers were killed. and Spain, the amazing, incredible army, and the Spanish Armada had been defeated in a sea battle. Spain would remain a powerful country after that defeat, but it would never be quite as strong again. From now on, it was the English Empire and Queen Elizabeth that would rule the world. Okay? Soon England, not Spain, would run an empire that stretched all across the globe. How's that for a weak woman? The Spanish Armada and the defeat of the Spanish Armada has always been an interesting piece of history to me. There is a movie that is called Elizabeth, the Golden Age. I want to just show you a trailer of that movie. I want you to pay attention to some of the things that you have seen in what we have talked about. You're going to notice maybe Elizabeth talking about how she refuses to be married. She's already married to England. You might see an assassination attempt against her life. You will see the French ambassador come to speak to her and hear her response. And then you're going to see the Spanish Armada, as well as this famous speech. And Elizabeth is decked out not in a royal gown, but in armor, and committing to fight and die alongside her men. So just take a look at this trailer.
Isabel.
Who are you?
Walter Raleigh.
Well, well.
I come bearing gifts for your majesty.
These gifts, Majesty, are the fruits of piracy, the true property of the realm of Spain.
Philip of Spain is no friend of England, Majesty. The more gold I take from him, the safer you will be.
He interests me.
I like you, Mr. Raleigh.
And I like you in return. I think it must be hard for a queen to know the simple pleasure of being liked for herself.
Majesty, this is no time for a dream. The threats to your person are real.
There are hard days coming. The rise of a great empire, the fall of another.
The Spanish speak openly of Mary Stuart as queen-in-waiting.
¿Te gustaría ser reina de Inglaterra?
There are young men in England who are eager to lay down their lives for the true faith.
Since when were you so afraid?
I'm always afraid.
Our mission is to kill a queen.
We will not fear the coming of the shadow of death.
The queen is unharmed,
Unharmed.
and you, man, are to be tried for treason.
Mary Stuart must die.
Who says so? Have I ordered it?
This is no time for mercy. The law must have its way. Forgive me. I have failed you.
How have you failed me?
Philip of Spain is a God-fearing man. You cannot declare war without a just cause.
And I ordered Mary's execution. I murdered God's anointed queen.
Chiamo a las legiones de Cristo a la guerra.
I've never seen her so distressed.
What are you staring at? Lower your eyes. I am the Queen! This Spanish Armada is at sea with an army of 10,000 men.
Their combined strength will overwhelm us.
What do you do when you're facing your death?
Some are dumb with terror, and some spread their wings like eagles and soar.
You are a wise man.
And you, madam, are a very great lady.
We have many weaknesses. We feel too much, hurt too much. All too soon we die, but we do have hope.
I am called the Virgin Queen. I have no master.
By God, England will not fall while I am Queen. Tell them I fear neither him nor his armies.
There's a wind coming that will sweep away your pride.
I too can command the wind, sir! I have a hurricane in me that will strip Spain bare if you dare to try me! Let them come with the armies of hell! They will not pass! And when this day of battle is ended, we meet again on the field of victory.
Alright, so pretty cool, right? She's a very strong and amazing character in history. I enjoy learning about her. I hope you have as well. And we'll catch you tomorrow for a reading video. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you then.